Right. So, Dwayne, thank you so much for doing this for us again. We appreciate it very much. And listening.
Right on. Well, just a little bit about my history with astrology. I've never had any kind of formal training. It was I got into Rudyard in 1972, and a whole year before I even had my own birth chart, I was reading his philosophical works and so on. So there's a part of my skill base that's missing in terms of all the intricacies of house rulerships and the decanates and all the details. But I found that Rudyard kept developing a more an advanced kind of astrology as the years went by, and I just kind of got dragged along is how it felt. And the picture kept getting bigger and bigger. But at the same time, the core tools that he was bringing forth were getting kind of simpler and simpler. And I found that when I got onto using the lunation cycle and the progressed lunation, a lot of the other factors in astrology I just let go of, and I just concentrated on using this, especially the progressed lunation technique. And that took me into areas of mythology and the Mayan calendar, which I've shared with some of you. So this has been a real integrating kind of technique of all the astrological tools, and I would definitely put it in that realm that Rudyard refers to as the transpersonal. You're really going out and into a realm that's doesn't have a lot of cultural infrastructure. Let's say it's a very new. I don't know of any other astrologer historically that's brought this technique forward other than Rudyard, and of course Layla Rael, his last wife. They really developed this into a high art. So on that note, and I've developed some graphics along the way. These are graphics right here that I've created. Dwelling on the notion of the new moon before birth, that's really a fundamental key to this whole technique. And I'll have more to say about that as we move along. So the progressed lunation technique lays out the story of a human life. And as a practitioner, it's really a pleasure and an honor really to sit with people and do exactly that, to start with birth and even the new moon before birth, and trace the development of their consciousness through consecutive cycles right up to the present. It's really quite a wonderful journey to be with somebody and help them map that journey. And that's really the role you take when you're sitting with a client. So the technique is based on the synodic cycle of the moon, otherwise known as the lunation cycle. So from new moon to new moon. Now the lunation cycle as let's say an intellectual or a metaphysical structure is mathematically fractal. So as the fractalfoundation.org says, a fractal is a never-ending pattern. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. So it's just saying that no matter what the scale, the structure remains the same. They are created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. So this is what, the graphic on the left, that's the fractal image. This is how I've always felt when I'm working with the progressed lunation, is that I'm journeying. And there's definitely this dynamic feeling to the whole technique. Now, for some reason, I'm not, there we go. The fractal nature of the lunation cycle makes it a veritable key to all worlds that can be used to examine the cycle of relationship linking any pair of celestial bodies. This includes the relationship between the progressed sun and the progressed moon, and which is termed the progressed lunation. So that's important to get, is that we're not looking at the progressed moon in isolation. We're looking at the angle that connects the progressed sun and the progressed moon. And the inner structure of the lunation cycle is what is the fundamental pattern that we're working with. So any two planets, when they conjoin, we would place that up at the new moon point at the top. So if you're doing, if you're mapping notes out, you've got this mandala of the lunation phases, and what you're going to do then is enter life events, but more specifically, you're going to be tracking specific inner realizations. The progressive lunation technique utilizes the lunation cycle to examine both the lunation birthday and the new moon prior to birth. So the lunation birthday is the phase of the moon that you were born at. And here's a quote from Rudyard. A simple look at the moon in the night sky can tell us whether it has reached the same of 8 discernible phases as the one at the moment of our birth. That is to say, our lunation birthday can be a matter of concrete, simple, and repeated experience every month. This allows us to feel frequently our attunement to the great rhythm of life, to resonate consciously every month to that aspect of the solilunar relationship which is imprinted indelibly upon the electromagnetic field of our total psychosomatic being. Every person born at full moon or first quarter time should be able every month to feel a deep, direct, elemental sense of recognition as his or her lunation birthday brings back this phase, representing, in an archetypal sense, his or her basic capacity for relationship to all earthly lives. So if you've never experienced consciously the phase of the moon at your birth, I really highly recommend you make the effort to do that. It's, as Rudyard is pointing to here, it can be a very deep feeling of resonance that comes up for you. And the more you work with it, moon after moon, the more accessible it becomes. And it is very empowering. That's been my experience. So there's my lunation birthday, being a waxing crescent individual. The sun-moon angle at my birth was 63 degrees. So that puts me, or 64 degrees, puts me in that waxing crescent sector of the lunation cycle. Another quote from Rudyard: the lunation cycle should be the very foundation of any astrological interpretation of personality, as well as of health and happiness or ease of function. Thus, the fact that a person is born at one phase or another of this solilunar cycle conditions and often determines his typical character. It defines the person's fundamental nature. So we're going right to the heart of our, the very essence of our being is what Rudyard's pointing us to here. Rudyard himself was born in the balsamic or seed portion of the lunation cycle. Rudyard's eightfold lunation cycle model is especially helpful in distinguishing the archetypal qualities associated with one's lunation birthday. For example, his own lunation birthday is located in the balsamic or closing sector of the cycle. This is metaphorically the realm of the seed, and true to phase for Rudyard, the seed became the central icon of his long and productive life. Throughout his writings, he encouraged the emergence of seed men and seed women. According to Rudyard, these are people who have the vision and courage to wait and to, in some way, through their lives, through their example, and through whatever they leave after their deaths, become the seeds of the future world. And wasn't he an exemplar of that? The progressed lunation is a secondary progressions technique built on the convention that a year after birth accords structurally with a year in the life. The technique integrates the progressed sun and the progressed moon via the constantly changing phase angle joining the two. The most primordial starting point for exploration of the progressed lunation is the new moon before birth. The new moon before birth is a vital factor in ascertaining the fundamental nature of the stream of vital forces energizing our entire biopsychic organism. Another Rudyard quote, "If the new moon before birth and the natal sun are in the same sign, the quality of this sign pervades freely the whole nature of the person. But if the natal sun and the new moon before birth are in two different signs, a basic dualism should be more or less strongly in evidence in the personality." So this is pointing to some of the intricacies that are available to us in exploring that new moon before birth. Another factor is, were there any planets conjoined the new moon at that point? For example, I have Mercury is conjunct the new moon. So that's what Rudyard terms a planet of destiny. So it's definitely a function in our psyche that is accentuated for this life. And there are other ways of exploring that. Some people cast a chart for the new moon and look into all kinds of connections between the new moon and the rest of the chart. It just depends how deep you want to go. So a while back, and based on my experience of the Rudyard Study Group on Facebook, I developed the graphics on the left as a way of consolidating in one image the different, this is now bringing in the Sabian symbols, which we talked about last week. Every new moon has a particular Sabian symbol. So when we do a graphic up like this, it brings all of those into one place, so we can get a sense of the whole life of the person and some of the major themes that come up. So you can imagine an ascent of consciousness here through from birth, and with every consecutive progressed lunation cycle, you have a new tone comes in at the progressed new moon. And that tone carries for the 29 and a half years of that cycle. But it, as you can see, intuit from the diagram, these are themes that are with us over the whole of our life. You know, they get layered onto previous themes and so on. So there's always this ascending journey and engagement with a new territory. If you've never worked with the progressed lunation, Rudyard himself suggests that it's really good to do a biographical study of someone famous or a well-written biography, and just go in and explore their life in relation to the progressive lunation, which is exactly what I did with Rudyard. And these are graphics that go back to the 80s when I was really getting into this technique. So we see on the left the lunation cycle that Rudyard was born into. So the new moon there, deep into the cycle in the seed portion, and that was his natal lunation. And when we look at the new moon before birth, and bring in the Sabian symbols, we get a parade of army officers in full dress, the dedication of human beings to the service of their community, surrendering of individual to collective need, group responsibility. And at the time I put the note, basic foundation of Rudyard's life. So that's really what the new moon before birth represents. It's that really most primordial foundation of our psyche. So these are notes that I made, and this is typically what you would do in exploring the progressive lunation technique. I've realized that in some of the investigations I've done, that little piece of paper, it just isn't big enough, 8.5 by 11. It'd be great to have a jumbo size to work with, because well, for some people, they go through so many changes and realizations that it can be quite a massive document, really. So this was the Rudyard's final progressive lunation cycle. As we see up near the new moon point, there's his death. He was born in the seed period of the lunation, and he died in the seed period of lunation. And that was in 1985, I believe. So for myself, if we go down on the right-hand side, we can go back to where Rourke encounters Rudyard through reading the lunation cycle. Back when Rudyard was in his progressed full moon period, he was getting a lot of attention in the San Francisco, Berkeley area. They really celebrated his life, and that's when I hooked up with him. And as we go further deep into the cycle, we see, his book, Consciousness, Crisis, Creativity, right at the progressed last quarter. And then the emergence in the last few years before his life of the Rudyard Institute for Transpersonal Activity. Now, this is the archetypal seed group that developed around Rudyard and his works. And his wife, Layla Rael, who was, 30 years younger than him or 40 years younger, worked with him and a handful of people, Michael Mayer, who operates the Chaldea.com website. These people all pulled together to host 2 conferences prior to Rudyard's passing. I was fortunately at both of them, and they were really memorable events in my life. It was just so gratifying to see that for this man who had devoted so much of his life to future generations, that his legacy was being managed and that there was a group there to form it. They formed it as a foundation, and I think they accept funding and so on. But it has really, as those of you who have been to the Chaldea.com website know, the resources are extensive, and they're given out freely or by donation. So this is really the manifestation of Rudyard's ideal of the seed group. Jose Arguelles was a young professor who Rudyard sought out because he saw Jose facilitating the kind of cultural events that were necessary to realize the vision Rudyard was holding around the Earth or the planet as an art whole, that by the creation of art communities, we'll say, the new values could be incorporated into form and into real lives. And he talks about the artist as avatar. And he saw Jose as a manifestation of the artist as avatar. Arguelles was a visionary art history professor who was a very radiant artist in his own right, who Rudyard befriended, and at one point became or offered to work with Jose as an apprentice. But Jose had already chosen to align himself with the Buddhist, the Tibetan Buddhist Trungpa Rinpoche. And here's a quote from Rudyard, him speaking to Jose: "Even though you won't accept being my successor, I have to let you know that I know who you are." And they became very fast friends, and right up to the very end. Arguelles was fortunate to be at Rudyard's side, or at least with the body in the last, at the point of his death. And he was a devoted friend, and they exchanged a lot over the years. And if you go into Arguelles' life as a study, there's lots to work with. He certainly was a radiant, creative presence, and I worked with him in the 80s with the Harmonic Convergence event that he was the founder of, and I've read most of these books that he produced. A very radiant individual. Now, as far as calculations go, in this era of computer technology, the progressive lunation is not readily accessible, but this is one of the places it is. At astrolabe.com, you can apparently order a progressed lunation listing, which covers the 84 years of lunar phases and progressed sun and moon, sign and house ingresses. So this is the kind of hit list, as it says, dynamic hit list that's available from that website. Also, if you are on a PC, the Solar Fire astrological software apparently will generate the same chart. And it's a chart something like this. This is used to be offered out of San Francisco by astronumerics.com, but they no longer offer it. But this is what I was working from when I was working back in the 80s. Now, another site that gives you a kind of an abbreviated version of the progressed progressed lunation. I think the title, the progressed, whoops. Well, sorry. One moment, please. Now, in the heavy line box, the progressed phases of the moon, I think what it's actually tracking is not the progressed moon, but it's definitely the phase angle. And as I say, this gives you an abbreviated version, which you can map onto the structure of the lunation. And that's at lunarium.co. Now, for just the lunation birthday calculations, this is a great online calculator. www.moonpage.com. You can just fill in your data and click. And this is fun if you have an iPhone. It's a little app called Phase Day. Once your data is in, for you personally, it'll not only refer you to your phase of birth, but also when that comes up on an ongoing basis. So you can anticipate when in the current lunation cycle, your own lunation birthday comes up. So it's just kind of a fun little app, very inexpensive. Resources I would recommend related to the progressive lunation. We have the lunation cycle, Rudyard's foundation work on the left. And also what came out 3 years later, Phases of the Moon by a trio of astrologers. Both books will explain exactly how to do the calculations manually, and also give all kinds of interpretive information and suggestions. Phases of the Moon builds on the work of the mystic W.B. Yeats. And Yeats actually gives a little phase portrait for each of 28 phases of the lunation. So it's a very interesting layer to explore when dealing with the lunation birthday and with the progressive lunation in general. This book is online through Chaldea, a new type of lunation guidance. If you're wanting to just get a quick, exploration of the lunation birthday aspect of the progressive lunation, Chaldea has a number of charts of public figures, and in the charts you can quickly see the lunation type. So in the red circle there we see lunation type crescent moon. If you're doing research and you want to just quickly gather up that particular bit of information, that's a great resource. I think there's hundreds of charts there. Of all the explanations that I've come across by Rudyard for the validity of the secondary progressions, this was an unexpected place to find it. But maybe I'll read through what he has to say here, because this really speaks to, well, so why does it work? And what he has to say is that in so-called secondary progressions, what takes place in the sky each day after the birth of a person gives us an archetypal or symbolic picture of the conditions which develop during 1 year of that person's actual living. Astrologers often say that this equivalence between a year of life and 1 day in the sky is based on the fact that the two basic frames of reference used in astrology are the year and the day. That is, the revolution of the Earth around the sun and the daily rotation of the Earth around its polar axis. Thus, a special relationship is said to exist between these two kinds of motion. It is a symbolic relationship, for there is no logical reason for establishing a causal relationship between the day following the birth moment and the first year of life. Yet, symbolic though it may be, the equivalence of day and year in astrological practice can be demonstrated to be valid. And I can't see the top of my screen to read that. Redlina, are you able to see that and read it?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
It has occurred to me, however, that the length of the gestation period in the human species, 9 months, may provide a significant clue to the problem of the validity of the secondary progressions. If the sun in astrology represents the life principle, and each month of solar motion releases a specific seasonal kind of life energy, it seems logical to me to expect that the complete formation of a man, who is thought to be a microcosmic condensation of the forces active in the macrocosm, or at least in the solar system, should take a whole year. As the embryonic development in the womb takes 9 months, it would be natural to assume that the extra 3 months needed to complete the solar cycle would refer to the also embryonic unfoldment of a psychic organism. Such a psychic organism exists in man as the basis for the operation of emotional mental faculties and the development of a reflective type of consciousness deeply anchored in social and cultural factors. A consciousness able to look upon itself, to question the motives and the value of instinctual behavior, and to think in terms of words, symbols, and abstract concepts. 3 months equal 90 to 92 days, and if we consider the period of 90 years as a normal maximum length of a human life, at least in the present state of the solar system, and according to the length of the Earth's revolution, which evidently are not necessarily constant, then the 90 days after birth would represent the time during which progressions are effective in terms of the life of a human being, the time for the release of all the kinds of solar energy needed for the full development of man's psychic and mental capabilities. What happens in the solar system during the 90 days after birth would therefore present us with an archetypal blueprint for the growth of the individual's consciousness, or if we use the term in its broadest and most precise sense, his intelligence. Intelligence in man essentially is the faculty which allows him to consciously adapt to his biological, social, and psychic environment in such a way that he can obtain optimum conditions for his growth and fulfillment.
Thank you.